Sophie Wade, welcome to Partnering Leadership. I'm thrilled to have you in this conversation with me.
It's such a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
I'm really excited. Can't wait to talk about empathy works the key to competitive advantage in the new era of work. But before we get to empathy and its importance in the workplace, Sophie, would love to know whereabouts you grew up and how your upbringing impacted the kind of person you've become.
Hopefully I've never quite grown up. Let's just put that out there first of all. But I grew up in London, and dad was in the BBC. My mother was a teacher. So really had was looking at the world in a large way, in quite a sort of international. My grandfather was Russian, people all over the place. But I studied Chinese at university, and I've lived and worked in 5 different countries. And also in studying Chinese, that really opened my eyes to a very, very, very different culture to my own. In fact, there are similarities, but many, many differences. And that set me on the pathway of understanding, or needing to understand, by working in different countries, for example, in Hong Kong for 5 years, really trying to understand other people's perspectives. Because if you're going to succeed in another country, you really need to try and understand the culture and how people are thinking about things. And some of the basic things like, reincarnation is something that's very important in the Chinese culture. And that's how we look at things differently in the sort of Western European cultures in terms of things like that. So that was a really important life-changing experience that I had. Then living and working in Germany and a little bit in Italy and between England and France. All of those places have very different ways of working. So by the time I got to the US, I'd already had many different experiences about what work means, the value of it, who works over the weekends, who doesn't. And so when I got to this country, I didn't have a sort of set, work is like this. Each time it was a new experience, I was learning new things. And that really set me on the pathway of, where I am in terms of really looking at different ways of working and understanding people differently or sort of trying to put myself in their shoes, properly put myself in their shoes. So that's sort of my journey here.
What a wonderful opportunity through living in those different countries to need to adjust and develop greater empathy. One of the things I was wondering, Sophie, as I was thinking about empathy in the workplace, I traveled a lot for work myself also, and noticed some of the cultural differences. I wonder if empathy in the workplace is also partly cultural. So are there cultures where people are more comfortable with empathy in the workplace, and cultures that have separated that feeling from the action of getting the work done?
That's an interesting question. I think it's more timing. I think in the past, historically, there's been more of, my word is my bond type thing. It was based on it had to be based on handshakes. We didn't have the whole legal system supporting all of those type of things. So it really was, a lot of business transactions were relationship based. And so, that was what you had to rely on. And now with legal, with all these other things, we were able to move to a more transactional way of doing business. And now we have the phrase I love and hate to say, it's like, it's not personal, it's business. Like, where's that? So I think it has been more about how things have changed over time, and how the speed perhaps of how we've been doing business and that has, or the structures, the frameworks we have, the legal frameworks we have, that we haven't had to rely on relationships. But I think, yes, there's probably some cultural differences in terms of business and empathy. I think generally it has been something that we have, generally we practice much more in our personal lives than in our business lives. And I think in those cultures and in countries where there is less of a definition, where there is much more of a relationship connection and a much more fluid relationship between business and non-business, I think those are where the empathy will play in much more. But I think it is something that is needed just to change the dynamics of the relationships, because work is just faster now. We're moving in a different place. We're having to work much more closely together, and across global distances, local distances, and cultures, and all these different gaps that we need to bridge. And human understanding is a thing that's going to help us with that.
And I wonder, Sophie, so if this has been a part of our personal lives in many instances where we've had that empathy, is it something that in some instances people say empathy is more of a trait? And I believe through reading your book, you believe it to be more of a skill that can be developed. What parts of empathy would be more traits focused, and how can empathy be developed in your view?
So I look at empathy as being both, it's potentially unusual in the fact that it is both a value, right? In terms of corporate value, you can have empathy as a value. It's also a mindset or orientation or approach that you can have generally overall. And it's a skill that you can practice. So I think, that's what's interesting about it for me, because you really can infuse, a corporation in an organization, in the workforce, in many, many different ways with empathy. So in terms of the skill and how you can learn it, there are so many different ways that, it has sort of 3 steps: think, feel, and act, in terms of the thinking piece of it, putting yourself in somebody else's shoes and really trying to understand the world from their perspective. And that is useful, whether it's dealing with a customer, particularly that, selling with empathy is something that is really more and more important now, that buyers sellers rather used to have all the power, and the buyers, needed all the information from the seller in order to be able to work out whether to buy something or not. Now we have, thanks to our smartphones, and the internet, we have so much information already before we connect with any seller. So the seller really has to be able to reach out and connect with the person who they're trying to convert. So there are so many different instances now that we're needing to utilize those skills, as I said, with customers, with employees, understanding with our teammates when we're trying to come up with a minimal viable product. There's been some customer feedback. We need to iterate. We need to make an upgrade on the product or service because our competitors have, and how are we going to work together quickly? So those are times where we can really use empathy to understand, to connect, to communicate better, to be listening much harder to the other person, and really empathy is also instrumental and sort of in with trust and creating that safe space, so that when you're collaborating and really trying to come up with some new ideas, everybody feels safe, feels welcomed, and feels that they can contribute their best and crazy ideas, which may be, what's going to actually create the competitive advantage for your team and your company going forward. So there are many, many, many different aspects where empathy is very, very helpful, and different ways that it can be learned and practiced.
And one of the things you also mentioned is that the modeling of that empathy is important. I talk a lot about Satya Nadella, and he has done a lot of things really well in his leadership, but his modeling of empathy has been inspiring to other leaders at Microsoft to try to model that empathy and set the right culture. What are some examples that you have of leaders showing that empathy and creating a culture that encourages greater empathy?
Well, yes, he is. fabulous in that. In fact, just at the World Economic Forum, when Klaus Schwab was just interviewing him, the first question that Schwab had, his response was about empathy and about, he used the word caring, but he then said stepping into the shoes of others. And if Microsoft is going to be able to sell, we need to understand, sell well and really grow. We need to be stepping in the shoes of our customers and potential customers. So, he is really focused on that. I think there are CEOs all over the place, a lot of ones that we don't see, that we don't hear so much about. Thinking about examples, there are, and it can be all the way through the organization. Obviously, having a CEO who really exemplifies it, and for all the people in the organization is really important in terms of that modeling. I'm actually blanking right now on really good examples of it. Goodness.
And if you want, but yeah, we can come back to it, and I'll edit it out. I just wanted to see if there were any examples on top of your mind. No worries about that. So, Sophie, this empathy is really important, and it is something that can be developed, as you said, for each and every one of us. Again, I wonder, many of the leaders that I interact with, first of all, would probably rate themselves higher on empathy than some of their team members would. That's one part of the story. The other part of it is sometimes their pushback is, what is too much empathy? Where have I crossed the line? And added to that is Paul Bloom out of Yale University has written a book against empathy. And part of his case is that empathy for leaders can distort our judgment. So can we have too much empathy? What is the right level of empathy for leaders?
I'm interested that he went so far as to write a book about that. I think there's a lot more empathy. There'll be so much more empathy that would need to be infused into the workplace before we need to be concerned about that. That's one thing. Empathy is about human understanding. So, and it doesn't mean that you are bulldozed, that you do everything that the other person wants. That's not the point. That's not what empathy is. It's about, first of all, understanding what the other person is thinking, then tapping into their emotions, really understanding their experience. So it's really trying to sort of say, I'm not judging you from my perspective. I'm not thinking about my reaction, like how I would act in that position. So it is really trying to, in the book, I talk about a balance of needs. So it's not only thinking about your needs or only think about my needs. It's really trying to make sure that there's a balance in between. And so that is a little confusing to me about what Bloom is saying, because the whole point about being a leader is to really understand, whether it's your executive team or the employees or anybody in your ecosystem, trying to understand what the right balance of need is going to be, so that you have the information that you need, so that you're understanding other people's perspectives and then making the right decision. So he obviously has an interpretation of empathy that is certainly not the same as mine. But at the core, for me, it's really about human understanding. And I don't see how we could be better off with less, or trying to have less human understanding when we're trying to build businesses and keep our employees and engage them in a sustainable way.
And I know you address this too, Sophie, even when it comes to conversations around diversity and inclusion and psychological safety. That ability to have that greater empathy, to connect with other team members, is really important. So in vast majority of cases, as you say, we are not at risk of having too much empathy. If anything, to a certain extent, while when we put on our suits and go to the work environment or get ready for the Zoom meetings, it's when we end up having less of that empathy that we need to have to be able to connect with people. So you have written about empathy, and one of the things I like about your book is that you also have exercises for people to think through in
Yep.
order to develop their empathy? What might be
Yep.
something the listeners can think through for themselves in order to work on increasing their level of empathy?
So some very simple things, and the whole point of the book was really to sort of set the stage, create a framework so people could understand where we are, because it's really about the future of work and how we're moving forward. And the human-centric element that really is an important counterbalance to all the technology that we're doing. So it's really important to be able to move forward and understand how to take those steps. So now that we're working at a faster pace and we're doing a lot more teamwork, the many, many more projects that we're working on together in groups of 2, 3, 4, and more. So when it comes to teamwork and interactions with 2 or more people, it's really critical to listen. And that's one of the first steps, because the more that you listen, the more that you can empathize, right? It's more about understanding how the other person sees the world. And so trying to step back from your own judgment, step back from one's own reaction. Okay, oh, I wouldn't do that. Just stop, think, try and sort of maybe crystallize your own reaction so you can put it aside for the moment, and then focus, how is that person thinking? How is that person feeling? And if you aren't sure at all, just ask questions, and open questions. So open questions basically mean there can't be a yes, no answer. So rather than sort of saying, do you like this or not? It would be sort of, what are the other aspects that I'm trying to understand? And also trying to say, well, is this what I heard? I'm not quite sure that I got this right. Is that what you were trying to explain? And what other data would help me understand this, because I'm a little bit confused still, or I'm not clear about this particular element? The more you're drawing understanding out, the more that you can put yourself in the other person's shoes and sort of see how they're seeing it. And it helps you sort of bridge a gap. If you have this information and they have different information, like what different information they do and how has that affected their opinion? So listening, asking open questions, and another aspect of it, really to help empathize, to help just the process of empathizing, is to look for common ground, to find common ground, and create shared memories. And that's where sort of building relationships, people do not have to be friends, but the more that we have our good relationships, it puts us on the same side of the table, so that at least maybe you and I, we both love Successions, or whatever it might, some TV program, sports team, whatever it might be, that then we at least know, even if we're going into a challenging conversation, that there are some areas where you and I do see eye to eye. And that's going to help us be more willing to look for the points of connection and agreement, rather than remain separated and distant and just sort of reside with our conflict.
Oh, what you mentioned, Sophie, really resonates, because one of the biggest challenges we have is asking those open-ended questions you talk about, and listening, truly listening with a desire to understand and connect with that other person. Now, with the transition of many organizations to somewhat of a hybrid environment, I was meeting with a CEO yesterday, and she was frustrated about the fact that they have a flexible return to work option of 3 days a week back to the office, and almost no one's coming back. So people are not taking advantage of interacting with each other. And her question was, what can I do to help with these connections? Because over the past couple of years, they have hired a lot of people who at times have met each other through Zoom, but haven't had the chance to have the kind of conversations you talk about, Sophie, to show greater empathy and to connect better. So what can leaders do, both as they're transitioning into a hybrid environment and for the future of work, to make sure to provide the opportunities for people to engage and have greater empathy for each other?
Sure, yes. So hybrid models are more complicated, because they're different for not only every company, but they're different for different teams, for different departments, because they're made up of different people. And each person on a team they may, some people really want to go back to the office, but, or particularly, so a young person may be, have been completely sick of being at home with their two, flatmate, apartments, roommates who they, was fine when they could all go out drinking, but when they couldn't, there's like enough already. But they want to go back when they're going to be other senior people at the same time in the office, so they can connect about, career things and look at different projects and look at how they might be able to develop their careers. So there are lots of different elements that go into how people are now thinking about what happens at the office, and really thinking about, someone put it to me recently, the function of the office, like what is happening there. I think about the hub and club. So the hub aspect, that you might come together for collaboration exercises. You can collaborate virtually for sure. We've managed to do that very well over the last couple of years. There's also the club aspect, which is, generating more, deepening relationships in different ways. And so, yes, particularly for newly onboarded employees, to help them connect and feel comfortable on a team, asking questions when they don't know their teammates well, and they might feel stupid or just uncomfortable to raise their hand. The question is how are they being lured back to the office? And I understand for many leaders who have they've been able to kind of say, you have to come to the office. It hasn't been a question of trying to entice people back to the office. But it has been a traumatic couple of years. And if those people who have really enjoyed, who have enough space at home, who got enough bandwidth, broadband bandwidth, that they have been comfortable, now that they know that they can work really well like that, it's a question of like, how is it going to be set up so that I can be working in a positive way, and I know that people are going to be there. So I interviewed a guy who had set up a company called Tactic. And what they do is a part of it at the core is a very simple thing, which basically shows me when people are going to be in the office, that I might want to kind of like, oh, well, Mary's going to be there then, and Margie, and, Mark is not going to be there tomorrow, but he's going to be there on Wednesday. So maybe I'll go on Monday and Wednesday this week. If they have a very, very flexible way of doing things. You can also follow people. And so I can kind of go, okay, whenever Mark says he's going to be in the office, then I might, want to be there then. And I could sort of sort it out that way. And these are important things as we are trying to design the new way forward. And that's just that goes to everything about how we work. And very much included with what role the office plays, what I'm going to be doing there, the type of work I'm going to be doing there, and really doing that purposefully and intentionally. So that is why, if you're just expecting people to turn up, no disrespect to this woman, but it really needs to be sort of thinking, how am I going to let them know that people are going to be there? What's the point? I'm sorry.
No
problem. If they are going to be working on some collaboration things, create the atmosphere so that making sure that people are there. So it is really about designing work and thinking about how people can work effectively and what role the office plays. There are lots of people who want to be in the office a number of days a week, but it's just trying to make it set it up so that it's going to help them do their best work wherever they are.
It is a struggle, though, that design, Sophie. It's yes. What you mentioned, it's like a Rubik's Cube. Yep. Of who is going to be in, when, how, what is advantageous to some versus others. There's a lot of data showing that primarily women and people of color would want to take advantage of the remote days more so than others. But FaceTime with leaders who are in helps promotions if you're in every single day. So there are lots of concerns, but part of what I hear from you is you really have to design it and think it through. You can't just say 2 days a week, 3 days a week, we're going back to the office and that's it.
Now, I'm very supportive of the fact that it's truly flexible, because if people are saying, you have to be in the office Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and that's it, that's really not flexibility. And honestly, at the top level, workplace flexibility is a mindset first, and then it's a policy. I love to quote Mary Barra, the CEO of GM, who came up with their workplace policy for 150,000 people is work appropriately. So, but what that means is below that is with a team, with the manager or the leader of that particular team or group or division, how can they work together to make it work? To, if it was focused on results, how can we all work together to make sure that those particular teams under that divisional umbrella are all going to be able to work effectively? And so if those 3 or 5 or 6 or 7 people within a team, they can work together to work it out. It's not just like I get to do this and you get to do whatever you want. It is, how are we going to make sure that we are in the office at the days of the week that we can all overlap and really do the work that we need to. And that goes to the how. So we have never worked out how we need to work. We were all in the office, we all piled in, and we could make mistakes and correct them just off the cuff. When we are, even though we've had lots of remote offices and people traveling all the time, but we all sort of worked it, muddled through, I would have said. Now we need to be purposeful as we're actually now creating a new way forward. We need to think about how things are going to get done. We've implemented new technology, which brought in lots of new processes. We need to maintain flexibility for pivoting, whether it's competitors who've integrated new technologies, whatever that might be. There are going to be many different ways that we need to be thinking about contingency plans and ability to have flexibility and have that flexibility within our operations. So that design needs to be much more flexible than even a Rubik's Cube, and design that. And then hybrid is one piece of that. So the whole thing is, yes, pretty complicated, but I do really seriously believe and see a future where we can be much more engaged and doing much more interesting work. The most boring work is being done it has been automated away, and we can be working more closely together and in really interesting ways when we are thoughtful about how we're going to make it all work together. And there's lots of tools that we can use, obviously workflow management software and project management tools and things like that.
It provides a lot of opportunities, but all I know is that it's something that a lot of leaders didn't have to think about much before and is a stressor now. It's almost like there are so many different options and ways of doing things. But in reading your book, I was even reflecting on our traditional work days of 9 to 5, which contributes to all the commute going into the cities and out. So we have a lot of structures that are outdated, but yes, it both provides us a tremendous opportunity and is a stressor at the same time for a lot of leaders, because in addition to their regular leading of their teams and organizations, now they have to rethink that future of work and how most effectively to get people to work together.
Completely agree. And let's be clear, the 40-hour work week was the fantastic idea of a Welsh socialist called Robert Owen in 1817, who came up with this idea. And it was 8 hours of work, 8 hours of labor, 8 hours of leisure, 8 hours of sleep. That was it. It was no more than that. And it was that was like one of the best marketing pitches that's, went around the world like wildfire. And that's where we are. So there's no rhyme or reason to why we have to stick to that. That was an idea then. And now it's a different idea. And that was when, now we have, back in the 1960s, 67% of families in the US had one person working outside the home. That's not the case anymore. We have about the same number of families with kids where both parents are working. We need different, flexibility. And so, yes, so you do have a lot of, working mothers who want more flexibility. And we do have to really make sure that we're not allowing for the discrimination, which has been there for a long time, to sort of undermine some of these new ways of working. But let's be clear. The future of work, all this technology has been coming for a long time. Alvin Toffler wrote amazing books, The Third Wave and Future Shock, in 1970 and 1980. He foresaw almost every single part of this. So it's not that it hasn't been, we haven't kind of, like, oh my God, it was brought in the pandemic. No. This was all happening anyway, and people were resisting it. So there are lots of companies, and they are really going to be cleaning up for a while until other people, really to sort of embrace this and take it on and take on all these changes, because the people who have been working on this and been adapting have been able to pivot reasonably easily during the pandemic. They engage their workforce. Have given them lots of flexibility. It's not that for everybody kind of went, oh my goodness, like what a surprise. So, empathizing with leaders who are, who there's a lot more that needs to be done. I get it. I understand. And the quicker they can, really embrace the fact that this is what's needed for their businesses going forward. We need more out of employees. We need them to engage, we need to step up and deal with much more complex, problems, and working closely together. And that's why we need to take all of this on. Otherwise, their businesses will just simply not be competitive. And that's why I'm very clear, the human-centric understanding is key for competitive advantage. And I do see some big discrepancies in the next several years as people try and work this out.
And that's why it's important, I think, that empathy that you talk about, Sophie, is really important for us to enable the team members, people in the organization, to connect with each other, because the technology makes it even more important for the human collaboration of it. So if we can't get effective collaboration out of the team members, that's how we will be left behind. This is no longer people doing their individual roles. The intelligence of the team and organization comes from that collaboration, which relies on the empathy you talk about, which enables the connection between the individual team members.
Absolutely. And it's cognitive diversity. You were talking about inclusion, and that's inclusion across the board in terms of, every single dimension that we need to be inclusive, to make sure that everybody, and age as well, where we have, there's a lot of complaints, but, across generations, we need everybody to be working together, to be bringing, whether it may be and these are sort of broad-based, statements, but, a lot of younger people who are growing up with technology have a lot of intuitive understanding, a lot of time to be playing with technology. And for myself, I'm very happy with technology, but I use it more functionally. I need to be listening to my kids and other people who are really being able to bring in all of their different ideas and perspectives, and empathizing and sort of really getting everybody to contribute as much as possible to come up with the solutions that are going to allow my business to succeed. We really need that, and to really get the most out of where we are, deal with these challenges. And the key thing that I would sort of recommend to leaders who are very much challenged by where we are is to be asking employees for the solutions. There are a lot of people who have, particularly over the last 2 years, we have a lot of learnings that can be very, very helpful. And people have some great ideas in terms of how to move forward, in terms of new ideas, that can be integrated and implemented at the company that they could listen to and benefit from.
Oh, I love that, Sophie. One of your chapters is transitioning from commander to coach. And many leaders still think like the commanders, wanting to come up with the answers rather than asking the questions. Because in many instances, the answers are there.
Hard. I mean, trying now to come up with the answers, and, nobody expects anybody at the top to have all the answers now. It will be way too hard. But, the more that they can, you can get people engaged, you can have them part of the solution, and that really helps them in terms of their contributions and their engagement. But, for the people at the top, wow, I mean, it's so hard now. There are so many things to be thinking about. I think I find it a very exciting time, but we have so much change going on, just, crowdsourcing, if you want to use, I mean, obviously that seems like a dated term now, but crowdsourcing answers is a really good idea. And then the ones that get through, the ones that when you have some really rigorous debate, the ones that get through, those might be the really good solutions.
It requires a different mindset and skill set, though, Sophie, and I would
Mm-hmm.
love to hear some of your thoughts with respect to the skill set it takes. The mindset of letting go and really allowing the conversation to guide where the organization goes on any decision is easier said than done. A lot of leaders want to still hold on to that power, but it also takes a different skill set to be that coach rather than the commander. So what would you say leaders need to do with respect to the skill sets, and what are the skill sets that will enable them to bring the best from their teams to guide the organization and come up with the answers, rather than having everything on their shoulders to try to come up with the answers to?
So there's a part of the book when I'm talking about facilitation, and I think that's a very, very different role for leaders to have, let's just say in a brainstorming session, to not be speaking first, only speaking last, and maybe not at all, and just facilitating, so to make sure that everybody speaks, everybody feels included, because that's part of their role as well. And you can have situations where the ideas are gathered and before the meeting, and then shared anonymously, so that the leader could put their idea in, but it gets equal, nobody is kind of going, oh well, we definitely want to sort of say Sophie's idea is great because she's the leader, and we want to make sure that. So there are ways to make sure that the ideas get properly debated and go through sort of rigorous. But the idea that the leader can be the facilitator and take on that type of role to help their teams do their best work, and really and supporting them and understanding them. So that's really where I sort of look at leadership as well in terms of empathy, is how can I help you? How can I understand you best, so that I can work out, I can read you and see how you're doing, so I can give you more responsibility, and recognize when you've reached your capacity and you probably shouldn't go further than that. We can test it, we can trial it. There's a quote from Lao Tzu, which is, we're the best leaders I think I'm going to completely butcher it, but it really is about the leaders do the best job when the people think they've done it themselves. The leaders actually sort of do themselves out of a job. So thinking about it like that, and when we also need, the centralized way of making decisions is just not fast enough anymore. And there was a very interesting research that was done, it was called Leaders 2020, which was done in 2016. And they were looking at what they call digital winners. And they were looking at the companies and that were succeeding, and the ones that had decentralized and pushed decision-making further down the organizations. Those were the ones that were able to make decisions faster, and obviously not all decisions, but taking the ones down and sharing them out, so that the responsibility was both distributed, but also you're giving more responsibility and helping take work off your shoulders, but also helping people feel more engaged, feel much more part of the process, because they have more accountability for the success of the company.
Yeah, and I encourage all the listeners, rather than thinking of why we can't or why I can't in my team or my organization, to ask how I can. And in reading your book, thinking through how I can become a more facilitative leader, showing greater empathy, and transitioning from that commander to coach that you talk about. You also mentioned something I find very interesting, Sophie. You talk about the fact that organizations, in the fact that with technology, they need to be able to pivot more quickly. That's going to, over time, lead to smaller full-time workforces. Would love to know your thoughts with respect to the impact on organizations, and with respect to us as individual professionals and leaders wanting to advance in our careers.
The careers be much more self-directed. They're already that way, right? We don't have the linear, continuous compounding careers that we've had, that you could just sort of get into a company, sit on that track, and nobody really had to pay attention to you because it was there. So now that's already not true. Some promotions or some advancements are horizontal or diagonal, and you're learning more skills rather than changing jobs. And we may not have jobs anymore. We may, or some companies, it may be very specifically about skills. And jobs are being crafted, or somebody's position is being crafted based on their skills, and not having these sort of job titles anymore. So I think there are a lot of different ways that aspect of one's progress is changing. We are now, potentially going to be having 5 careers each in our lifetimes. That was something that the Financial Times predicted in 2017. Very interesting, really, in terms of and fun, really, because you can take your skills and use them in different ways. Okay, so that was my marketing career, and I'm going to do something else. I think that's fabulous when there's so many people who actually didn't start out in the career that they really enjoy and they find it out later. More power to them. For what we really, in that smaller core that companies are likely to have because they need to be more nimble and be able to pivot, that works as you see more companies. There's a lot of research from SAP about this extended total talent pool, which includes many more freelancers, contractors, long-term, who then, and that's been trending for a long time, the more people we have in those environments who have more stable clients. So there are many companies and it has always, let's just say in advertising agencies, there's always had these long-term relationships with a bunch of designers, but there are many, many more roles that have been in those for those agencies and other companies that are sort of outside. The more that I, as a freelancer, can have a sort of stable of clients that use me regularly, the more stable my income is. And that's what we're looking for, right? We're looking for some security for my future. So we can have, when we get there, and there are other laws that have to change, and new IRAs that need to be developed, and all those kind of things. But I do see that as being ultimately where we're going, and I don't think it's a bad thing that we have, rather being people being hired and fired and all the rest of it all the time, that we have these companies which have more dotted edges, and people come and go, and they have different roles that changes over time. And then you have many, many people who are surrounding in a sort of network, as more of a fabric of companies that have hubs maybe. And that is much more of a stable environment, I see, over, in the future.
And I really like that perspective. It requires a different mindset with respect to the development that each individual takes on the responsibility of developing their own career path, not within the organization. 20 plus years ago, Tom Peters talked about something that at first I thought was a little bit crazy, but we are getting there, where he talked about how the way movies work, where a bunch of people come together for a project, complete a project, that would be the future of work. I love how you have built on that there is a small core that would be part of the organization, with these edges of contractors and people associating with the organization. So for us as individuals and as leaders, we need to develop ourselves for those potential opportunities, not within an organization, but with respect to having many clients and many relationships to take advantage of.
Yes, and I also think, this is one of the questions. Jeff Wald, very interesting. He was the founder of WorkMarket, and this is one of his biggest questions, like, who is responsible for helping train the individual? Because I agree with him that it shouldn't just be me. It's also the companies that I go and work for. And talking to actually a guy who's the managing director of an agency, Mobas agency in the UK, and he was saying, I see it as people, or when they come to my agency, they're on loan to me and I invest in them. We invest in them, but they're only with me for X number of years. And then they'll go on somewhere else, rather than like, if they leave, I'm never going to speak to them again. And I don't want to invest in somebody who I think is going to leave. Completely the reverse of that. So investing, they grow and that they're going to move on. But as they do move on, of course, then they're ambassadors for your company. They might come back again when they have more experiences and are more valuable. So I do, and Jeff has also says, well, the government, what role does the government have, and different organizations. So there are many different ways that we can do this. I think there is a lot more understanding. I also have a friend who does impacting and investing in education. And he was talking about the fact that now we have companies like Amex who no longer, or they've taken off a college degree requirement and focus on skills. Partly because we have a situation in the US where college education, and in many countries, college education needs to be updated and upgraded, as it does sometimes, with a lot of the high school education. And they're also focusing on middle school students as being, that's the moment to help them start understanding about the fact it's going to be up to them, and becoming self-directed and thinking about their career and where they want to go in life with all these new options. Fascinating. I mean, there's a lot of change that's going on, and I don't want to be blowing anybody's minds, but I mean, it is exciting. There's a lot to go on, going on, and that we're all part of this, whatever piece of the puzzle that we are involved with. And I think that really does put some responsibility on parents' shoulders to be as informed as possible about where we're going, because that is a role where there's a lot of disconnect sometimes about how much the world has changed, and being supportive of how Gen Z are coming into the workforce, and the support that they need in trying to navigate this very new world of careers, as you said.
It is mind-blowing, but it's also a wonderful opportunity. As a mutual friend of ours, Gary Bolus, talks about the fact that these are not laws of nature. The systems around us are choices that we have made in building these systems. So whether it is from governmental policy,
yes, but I wish I could really think that we knew that all this was going to happen, because I don't think we did. So we can give ourselves a break. But the point is very well taken. Please go on. Sorry.
Yeah. I mean, no, definitely. Meaning his point, though, is that we can make different choices. The way the government functions, and whether it's, as you mentioned, IRAs or unemployment insurance, it's choices that have been made. The way education system functions, it's choices that have been made. So we can make different choices as this future of work arrives. So it is really exciting for all of us. It does require for us, Sophie, in my view, to learn at a much faster rate. That's why I also love your podcast, Transforming Work. Read more, listen more, whatever is your favorite way of consuming information. So what resources, in addition to your book and your podcast, do you typically find yourself recommending to leaders as they want to think about the future of work, whether it is for themselves or in leading their organizations forward?
Having a lot of conversations. I mean, for my book launch, I had 3 different panel discussions, very diverse, very different backgrounds. And the panels themselves, the people there really enjoyed the conversation, because they were all coming from different perspectives. And it's different for everybody, and things resonate differently for different people. And as looking at all the different people I've interviewed for my podcast, it can be about skills, it can be about relationships, it could be about just operational tactics in terms of how to use synchronous versus asynchronous formats and tools, and so there was so much to be thinking about. But working out what the priorities are for the next month or 2, or the next 3 months, and just saying, what are the things that I need to try and orient. And a lot of it, as you keep saying so well, is it's about mindset first. So trying to work out and talking to people, so saying, well, this guy or this woman, they're doing well, and why are they doing well, and what are the different aspects, and what resonates with me, and how can I, apply that in my company? Is that going to work? And finding also the people within one's organization that seems things to be going well. I mean, there are some really, positive developments that are happening. They seem to be working certain things out, asking questions like how, what's going on? What are the key things that are helping that work? Because the more that people get sort of enthusiastic about the things that are working, and then tweaking and refining, the more that you can keep, apply that. And then, for different divisions, it's good. You have a different leader, you have a different group of people. It's going to need to be tweaked and refined in a different way. So there's a lot of conversations, and just learning from other people, because we're all people and we're all working it out, and we're all operating in different ways in different countries and different cultures. There you see, we go full circle back to culture.
Yeah, and I absolutely love that, Sophie, because it also builds off of what you mentioned with respect to empathy. Asking those questions, interesting questions, and listening is a big part of both developing greater empathy and that learning and growth, which is why I really appreciate whether it is your book, Empathy Works, or your podcast, Transforming Work. You share a lot of great content. Where can the audience find out more about you, connect with you, and your book, Sophie?
Thank you. Yes. So my company is flexcelnetwork.com, but there's a lot of the most content that I've done a lot of writing about all this stuff over the last 10 years is at sophiewade.com. And there are lots of articles. I need to get it updated because I haven't put it all there yet. We haven't got it updated recently, but there's a lot of stuff there that is helpful. There are also some courses on LinkedIn that almost 500,000 people have taken. So there are some courses there. I'm developing some additional courses as well, but there's a lot of reading. So there are so many articles that you can read about this in different perspectives. And so there's content there, and just listening to the podcast and these different ideas. And then other people's podcasts. This is really about learning. This is a time of learning and developing and growing in so many different ways.
It is such a wonderful opportunity, and it's a wonderful opportunity to tune in to people with a lot more signal. There's also a lot of noise, Sophie. So one of the things I appreciate about you is that you have a lot of signal. So whether it is with empathy being the key competitive advantage for that future of work, or with respect to what we need to do to enable ourselves and our teams to be ready for the changes ahead. I really appreciate you joining me in this conversation, Sophie Wade.
Thank you so much for having me. It's absolute delight talking with you. Thank you.